Hi. So, welcome back to Let's Make a Card Game. This is going to be part 3. And here we're going to talk about essentially card types and their mechanics. Um, last episode we talked a lot about how cards were played and drawn and how those dynamically are put together to create unique experiences within the card game. Here we're going to become a little bit more generic with how essentially these cards exist, and usually what they mean within a card game and their context. It's going to be a shorter video. Last time we talked about play and draw mechanics and dynamics, and now we're going to talk about, again, card types, mechanics, and as well as card zones, where they exist on the areas of the board and how, they're influenced in those ways. So, the first card type are permanents. In games like Magic, Pokemon, all of my inspirations, we have permanents. Cards that essentially persist over turns, and when they are played, they stay there. If the game state naturally progresses, the card will stay there. It will stay and it will continuously provide that gameplay. I like to envision permanents as adding to the game state. They increase space that is occurring within the game loop. While we go into our second card type, which are one-offs, which are essentially cards that are played to do something, and then once they do that something, they leave. And are usually meant to micro control the game. Maybe not even just micro, but I like to think of it as, instead of adding things to the game, they are moving pieces around. As well as, sometimes they do add, but they don't add as much as, again, permanents. And sometimes they're even meant to take away space from the game. And as you can see here, just like the last time, here's examples of what these cards are like. And now we can get into the mechanic of usually what these cards are split into, which are, so for one-offs, the ones we just talked about, these cards are split into two categories, which are target and global. Target is essentially the type of one-off card in which must be played onto something. Maybe just not one thing, but multiple. It must have targets. It is specifying a centerpiece, or just, they have basically behaviors that create a situation where this card is being played to affect the game state with I'm like losing my train of thought here. It's because it's breaking it down in a more elemental process, so it's harder to really say things that, mean exactly what they are. They must have a target to be played. Sometimes these are multiple targets, but in order to play, it's specifying choosing something or multiple things to be able to be played so that it can do its effect. Global, it doesn't need that. It just happens. Doesn't need a target. It just does the thing it says it does, and it doesn't need something to be there or something for it to be pointed towards. It just happens. And for permanents, it's split into three mechanics, which are interactables, passives, and triggered. So interactables are cards that are basically commanded. When they exist on the field, they are commanded to be done things. The player that owns the permanent or is on their side of the board, or however, it is commanded to do something, whether or not it's to move or to attack or to activate an ability. Passives provide constant effect. They don't need commands. They don't need fulfillment. It just does. It just exists, and it constantly affects the board state, or affects whatever it says it's going to. Triggered is a lot like interactable, but the activation occurs through fulfillment rather than just me as a player. I cannot forcibly make a triggered permanent activate unless I fulfill what that activation is. So if I'm going to give an example about how these three kind of interact, let's just say in Magic, an interactable would be an artifact that says when you tap this artifact, or tap, which is an activation I can activate on command, deal 2 damage to something, right? And passive would be all creatures, all of your opponent's creatures have -2 health. That's a passive. That's not triggered or interactable. It just does that. All creatures that are on my opponent's side have -2 health. And triggered says when your opponent plays a creature, do 2 damage to it. So I cannot force it to trigger unless my opponent fulfills, whatever that requirement is. Again, just like one-offs, split into target and global. Target would be the one that's like deal 2 damage to that creature, while global is all creatures have -2 HP. Or, like it doesn't need a target, it's just a constant, this global effect. And lastly, we're going to get into card zones, which are essentially ordered for gameplay. So all cards in card games exist within the deck first. Cards that exist here cannot be played. They're within the deck. And through draw mechanics, they get into our hand. Our hand is essentially our magazine. It's our ammunition, our repertoire, the things that with the options we have to, do things with, to affect the game state. We can affect the game state with our hand, the things that exist here. When we play cards, usually permanent cards, maybe not usually, always permanent cards exist on the board and on the field when they are played or created. And discard is where cards go once they have left our hand. Sometimes there's instances where cards in your hand can go back into your deck, but usually when cards leave your hand, they either go to the field or board or discard, as well as some permanent cards when, let's say, they quote-unquote die or they lose their, ability to exist, they go into discard. A bunch of different games have different dynamics within this, like, for instance, in Slay the Spire, once your deck is empty, it takes your discard and reshuffles it back into a new deck. Magic has 2 different types of discards. It has Graveyard and Exile, in which Graveyard is a generic discard, and Exile is a discard in which cards are outside of the game, because there's a lot of effects that affect the graveyard still, while Exile means it cannot be affected, it cannot be targeted, there are no effects that the card can interact with. And it's funny I say that because there technically speaking are like maybe a couple of effects that do matter with the Exile. But yeah, other than that, our next episode we're going to essentially get into actually making decisions for what our card game is going to be, now that we've kind of gone through and have established a lot of the core elements as to what cards are like, how we draw them, how we play them, and usually how they're fitting into specific dynamics and mechanics within how the player interacts with them. And yeah, I will see you on the next one.